Hi again, Mark here from TalkingBass.net. So over the past few weeks we've looked at how you can incorporate some simple bass fills into your bass lines. We looked at the basic chord tones as a solid foundation, then we added some non-chord tones into the mix in the shape of scales, and today we're going to go one step further and add some chromatic notes in there for that super slick and funky vibe. So first of all, what are chromatic notes? Well, chromatic notes are notes outside of our main tonality or key. This is the opposite of diatonic notes, which are in key. So diatonic is in key, chromatic is out of key. So think of the key of C major. Our main palette of notes will be using the C major scale. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Any other notes outside of that will be chromatic. So D flat, F sharp, A flat, B flat, any of those notes will be chromatic. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, that's all well and good, but if chromatic notes are outside of the key, aren't they just going to sound weird or plain bad when we use them? Well, the answer is not at all, and it's actually rare you'll ever hear a complete modern song or piece of music made up entirely of diatonic notes. You'll always hear some chromatic alterations to chords or melody notes, and it can add a lot of interest to the music. You just have to know how to use them. So just to give you an idea of how all of this is going to work, let's have a listen to a few famous chromatic bass lines. So first of all, here's a classic that you'll have heard a million times before, Sunshine of Your Love by Cream. Okay, so sounds pretty normal, but it does have a chromatic note in it. So that's in the key of D minor, but in there we have that A flat. That's a chromatic note. It's not in any of the D minor scales. Let's try another. Let's have a listen to the instrumental section from Sir Duke by Stevie Wonder. Okay, so that's in B major, and as we come up, we've got a D natural in there. That little minor third in there, that's a chromatic note. And lastly, let's have a listen to Ain't No Stopping Us Now by McFadden and Whitehead. And I love using this riff as an example of chromatic notes because there's quite a few in there. So here's the riff. Okay, so we're in B flat minor. There's a B natural. There's an E natural. There's another B natural again leading down into the B flat. The B natural and the E natural, they're not in B flat. They're both chromatic notes. But again, it all works really nice. Okay. So can you see anything in common with all of those riffs? Well, the chromatic notes in there were in passing. We didn't linger on them. Chromatic notes contain a lot of tension and dissonance, which is great, but tension begs to be released, and because we're rhythmically skipping through them, we're not drawing much attention to them. They just add that nice bit of spice to the line. So again, as in the previous lessons, we'll be using our basic jazz funk progression to try out some chromatic runs. We're going to use the 1-6-2-5 progression in D major, which is D major 7, B minor 7, E minor 7, and A7. And we'll be creating the fills over the A7 chord. So here we have that progression with the backing track and the sample bass line. So we're playing our fills over that final A7 chord. In the first lesson, we just used the basic chord tones, so the arpeggio of A7. Then in the second lesson, we filled in the gaps between those notes with the A Mixolydian scale. And now in adding chromatic notes, the notes between the scale tones, we're going to use two simple melodic devices in the shape of passing notes and approach notes. That way we get to see how we can use these in application as opposed to just learning the notes. Now, if you need to go over the arpeggio that I just played or the scale, then just have a look back at those previous two lessons, which I'll link to in the info below. So for a chromatic passing note, we're simply going to pass from one scale note to the next using the chromatic note in between. So remember, the chromatic notes are in between the scale notes. So as an example, we'll work through the A Mixolydian scale again. So just as a quick refresher, we had A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G natural, and then the A. So think of an A major scale and just flatten the seventh. So instead of the G sharp, we're playing the G natural. Okay, so that's the A Mixolydian. It's all written in the lesson material. Again, just follow that link in the info below. So, as chromatic passing notes, we could pass from the first to the second. So, we'd have A to B, so we would play the A sharp, B. So there I've got the 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret on the E string. We could also pass between the 2nd and the 3rd. So I'll play these both on the E string there. So I'll be taking the C sharp down from the 4th fret of the A string down to the 9th fret of the E string. So we could have B to C sharp there. So 7th fret to 9th fret E string. We just fill in the gap. So B, C, C sharp. So 7th fret, 8th fret, 9th fret. Okay, we could also pass between the 4th and the 5th. So that'd be D to the E, so we play D, D sharp, E. So that's the 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret on the A string. We could pass between the 5th and the 6th. So we've got the E there up to the F sharp, so that's going to be 7th fret to 9th fret A string. We just place that F natural in there, so we have 7th fret, 8th fret, 9th fret on the A string. Okay, and then finally we could pass between that flat 7 up there up to the octave by putting the major 7th in there. So we've got G natural, G sharp, and A. Okay, 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret on the D string. So, you know, you could use all of those in isolation, or you could use them all together. If you played them all together, you'd just get a chromatic scale. But that's not really how we're going to be using these. We're going to use them in isolation, you know, from one of those scale notes to the next. Now, it's worth mentioning that it's much easier to use these passing notes when you're actually moving to a chord tone or approaching a chord tone. So, as a perfect example, if we look at that flattened second in there, so we've got the A sharp, and the B, it's actually much, much easier to use it if we're descending because we're actually approaching the root note, which is a chord tone. If we approach the second's a non-chord tone, so it just doesn't have the same effect. So I'll just play up and down an A Mixolydian scale, and I'm going to use that flattened second in there as a passing note, and listen to how much better it sounds on the descent. So here's the ascent, and now in descent. Okay, because we're approaching that root note and we're resolving all that tension. As well as passing notes, we can also use approach notes, and these are even easier to understand because all we do is approach a chord tone chromatically from above or below. So let's have a look at our chord tones again. So if we look at A7, we've got the notes A, C sharp, E, and G. So in terms of the frets there, we've got 5th fret E string, 4th fret and 7th fret on the A string, and then the 5th fret on the D string. And you can put the octave in there for good measure. So that's the A7 arpeggio. So we can approach those chromatically from above or below. So first of all, let's just approach from below, okay? So we just have the G sharp leading into the A, and then if we move to the 3rd there, the C sharp, we could approach from the C natural. Then if we move up to the 5th there, the E, we could approach that from the E flat or D sharp. And then we look at the 7th there, that's the G natural. We can approach from the F sharp. So, okay, so they're all chromatic approach notes, just leading in from a fret below. And that's all you've got to think. You don't even have to think of the intervals and all of that stuff. Just think, approach each of those notes of an arpeggio from the fret below. That's it. That's as much as you need to think of. As long as you've got the notes there under your fingers, the chord tones, you just approach from that fret below. So, You can also approach from above. So if we did that, we approach that A from above, and then for the third, for the fifth, and then for the seventh. Okay. Okay, so each of those were chromatic approach notes. Now, as well as single chromatic approaches, we could also use double chromatic approaches, which is just the 2 frets from above or below. So, again, if we look at the root note there, the A, I could approach from 2 frets below, so we could play G, G sharp, A. Or I could approach from above, B, B flat, A. Each of those are double chromatic approaches. Don't worry about the terminology, double chromatic approach or single chromatic approach. Just think we're, targeting a chord tone from above or below. So then we move to the third, the C sharp. So we can approach from below or above. And then we move to the fifth, and we can approach from below or above. And then for the G natural there. And then we're back up to the octave. So either of those, above or below, they're both chromatic approaches. Now, as I mentioned in the previous lessons, if you're interested in any of this stuff, chord tones, scales, chromatic notes, melodic devices, any of that stuff, just check out the Chord Tone Essentials course over at Talking Bass. You'll learn the construction rules for every chord you'll ever need to learn. You'll learn the chord tones all over the instrument and how to apply them in your bass lines, fills and solos. So check that out, and I'll link to it in the info below. So that's the theory behind all of these melodic devices. So now let's try some fills. So just like in the previous lessons, I'm going to work through 4 different fills, and each one of these is going to have a different focus. So the first fill sounds like this. So this fill uses a very, very specific chromatic approach note that you will see all the time over dominant 7 chords, okay? And that is the minor third to the major third. So we begin with the C natural to the C sharp, okay? When we're playing over a chord like this, that's that minor third to major third sound. You get it all the time in blues and in funk. It's very, very common. So we have the A, the low A there, 5th fret of the E string, and then we move up, C to the C sharp, 5th fret to the 6th fret of the G string, and then we come down onto the A and the G, 7th fret to 5th fret of the D string. Then we've got a little ghost note there on the A string, and then we have once again C to the C sharp, 3rd fret to the 4th fret of the A string, and then we end on the A, so 5th fret of the E string. So very, very slowly, 3, 4. Okay, and that's the fill. Okay, so like I said, we've got that move in there, the minor third to the major third, which is a chromatic approach, a single chromatic approach note to the major third of the chord. And like I say, it's used all the time, okay? And always try to see the chord tones in there. Don't worry too much about all the scale notes. See the chord tones. We've got A7. I can see that. I've got that chromatic approach up to that third. Then I'm coming down the root note and the flat 7, which are chord tones. Chromatic approach again. And then we land on the root note. So it's all chord tones apart from that single chromatic approach to that major third. Okay, so practice it very slowly, build up speed, and then try with the backing track. For fill number 2, we've got a little bit more rhythmic interest. So here's the fill. So this fill begins again on the A 5th fret of the E string, that low A there. And then we come up with this little triplet. So we've got D, D sharp, E, 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret, A string. Okay. Then we come up on the G and the A, so that's 5th fret, 7th fret on the D string. And then we move up B, C, and C sharp. Then down to the A 7th fret of the D string, and then finally this little chromatic approach there on the E flat 6th fret of the A string. So very slowly. Okay, 3, 4. And that leads us back into the D. So in terms of the passing notes, we've got that the passing note there in between the D and the E. Then we've got the flat 7 and the root of the chord. Then we're up to this another common move actually, where we have the 2nd degree of the scale, then that flattened 3rd and the major 3rd. So it's like the chromatic approach that we used in the previous fill, but we're actually using it as a passing note because we're passing between the 2nd and the 3rd. And you'll hear that move a lot when you're on something like an A and you get this, you hear that a lot. So then we come down to the A of the 7th fret of the D string, which is the root note, and then we've got that passing note there, not passing note, a chromatic approach note into the D of the next bar, okay? So again, we're ramping up the tension with the chromatic approach into the D, okay? It's well out of the key, that's that E flat there, it's about as dissonant as you can get in the key of D major, but it doesn't matter. We're getting all that tension and it's resolving. So, okay, so again, practice it slowly and then try with the backing track. Now let's try fill number 3, which sounds like this. So we begin the fill, low A there again, 5th fret of the E string, and then we climb up chromatically with passing notes, okay? So we start on the 2nd, which is actually the 2nd fret of the A string. So I've moved the B from here down to here, just to make it a bit of a smoother line. So we've got B, C, C sharp. So this is just like we played in the previous fill, an octave higher, but we've got it down here. So 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret on the A string. Then we have D, D sharp, E, so that's 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret, okay? Now, if I was just showing you this fill, and you didn't know anything about any of these, passing notes or any of that stuff, that would just look like a linear line working up the string, and you wouldn't really have any way of, knowing what's going on at all, because it'd just look like a chromatic line working up. But now you know about these melodic devices, you can see that we've started on that root note and then we're using a double chromatic approach up to that C sharp, or you could class it as a chromatic passing note between the B and the C sharp, and then we've got this double chromatic approach to the 5th there, to the E. So we've got the notes of the A7 in there, and we're just approaching each of them in turn, okay? So, and then we jump up to the octave there, so this is the A, and then down to the G, 7th fret, 5th fret of the D string, and then we have a double chromatic approach down to the D in the next bar, so that's E, E flat, and then D, so 7th fret, 6th fret, 5th fret on the A string, okay? So, very slowly, and also bear in mind with the rhythm, we've got the A, we come in just after the second beat. So we've got 1, 2, okay? So we're on the second 16th note of the second beat when we hit that B there, okay? So very slowly, 3, 4, again, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's the whole fill. So let's try that with the track again. Finally, in fill number 4, we're going to string those passing notes together again, but this time in descent. So, here we are. So again, we begin low A, 5th fret of the E string, and then we're going to jump up and we're going to play the E at the 7th fret of the A string, and then we're going to play these descending chromatic passing notes from the B down to B flat, down to the A, all on the D string. So 7th fret A string, then 9th fret, 8th fret, 7th fret on the D string. So then I'm going to play an open A, and then we're going to come down A flat, G. So 7th fret, 6th fret, 5th fret, D string, okay? So we have open A again, and then E flat, 6th fret of the A string, leading back into the D. So we're always using that really dissonant E flat there, you know, the minor second of the key, to lead back into that D, because there's a lot of tension in there, okay? So okay, and you'll notice there, because it's quite a busy line, I'm not playing as much of a shuffle line with the 16ths. This is actually a shuffle 16th feel that we have. But as I play that line, I play it fairly straight, because it's quite busy and it's quite quick, which is something that happens all the time in swing. You know, when you're playing swing 8th notes, you generally, as the speed increases, you generally start to get a bit more straight, as opposed to, you know, I'm playing straight, okay, and it just feels a lot better, okay? So, in terms of the notes that we're actually playing there, in terms of the passing notes, I've moved up to play this second, flat second, and then root note. We're approaching the root note, or the octave of the root note there, with a double approach note, a double chromatic approach note. Then I'm playing that open A, which we can just use as a nice drone in there, and then we're chromatically approaching the 7th. So it's chromatic approach of the root note, and then chromatic approach note of the 7th. And then chromatic approach down to the next one, okay? So it's a very, very simple line, but it sounds really cool because you've got all those chromatics in there. But, you know, when you know what's going on there, when you know about these melodic devices, it doesn't seem as complicated. You know, if I was to just play that line, or you were transcribing it from some, you know, some tune you were learning, you might look at it just and think, oh, wow, that's a little bit odd. There's a lot of chromatic notes going on in there. But when you know what's going on, it's a lot easier to understand, and it's a lot easier to get under your fingers. So again, practice this fill really slow, and be warned, in the second beat, again, we're starting on the second 16th. So we have 1, okay, 1, 2, okay, so you have to wait for the second 16th in beat 2, okay? So, with the track. Okay, so I hope that helps with adding some chromatic spice into your bass fills. Remember to like the video and leave a comment. Also, subscribe to the channel to get all the news on upcoming weekly releases. All the lesson material is there to be found at talkingbass.net, so just follow that link in the info below, and I'll see you next week.